Ms. Franke, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
Welcome back, guys. I trust you've been staying safe. Now, the case of 8 passengers' mom, Ruby Franke, has taken a drastic turn. As of just about 6 hours ago, Ruby Franke, the Utah mother of 6, who was actually giving parenting advice to millions of subscribers on her family YouTube channel, has ended up pleading guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse after she spent months dishing this out to her kids in the company of another elderly woman by name Jodi Hildebrandt. Now, the plea or the guilty plea didn't just come by itself. She reached an agreement with the prosecution. What is this agreement? I'm sure you are wondering. So, if you recall, I've done videos on this case since its inception, and if you go back to the playlist, you would notice that primarily Ruby Franke was not facing this alone. Per the inception of the case and the facts bordering on it, Ruby Franke was actually in this allegedly with Jodi Hildebrandt, the older woman. So both of them were arrested together and had been held for about 3 months without bail. And leading up to now, Ruby Franke has been tried separately, with the trial of Jodi Hildebrandt scheduled to commence on the 27th of this month. Now, per the plea deal of Ruby Franke, she was facing 6 charges. 2 of these charges has now been dropped in exchange for her to also agree to testify against Jodi Hildebrandt. And this is where the whole thing gets tricky, because Ruby Franke's case or her defense seemed to me to be hinged on the fact that Ruby Franke was not committing these offenses in her right sense of mind with Jodi Hildebrandt, but rather it seems as though in her quest to be the best mom she can be, she saw Jodi Hildebrandt as someone who could help her achieve that, and in that, Ruby Franke decided to draw closer to Jodi Hildebrandt and learn more to be better, but it ended up that Jodi Hildebrandt was actually now manipulating Ruby Franke to get her to do the things that she did. That is the sense of interpretation I'm getting from her line of defense. And based on that, her plea agreement actually requires her to now agree to testify against Jodi Hildebrandt. That is how the whole thing is playing out now, such that these 2 women who used to co-host connections on social media and were good friends are now going to battle it out in court, where Ruby Franke has already been found guilty on 4 of the 6 counts leveled against her because she reached this plea deal, and per the plea deal, she's now going to testify against her so-called former friend Jodi Hildebrandt. Yeah, that is how it's going to go. So, I guess there's no honor among thieves, like people say. Well, if you don't agree, let me know in the comment section. But I don't really feel surprised by how this has turned out, because it was only natural that one was going to turn on the other. Sorry. And like I mentioned in my previous video, as the case was developing, I saw this could be a possibility that Ruby Franke will take, where it would look like Jodi Hildebrandt was the actual mastermind, and that Ruby Franke was a victim who was also perpetrating some wrongs based on what she had suffered as Jodi Hildebrandt's victim. making Jodi Hildebrandt the mastermind and the ultimate manipulator and orchestrator of all these charges. Someone would say, maybe this is not fair on Jodi Hildebrandt, but hey, who am I to judge? You and I were not there. And I don't know the defense that Jodi Hildebrandt is also going to put up when her trial commences, such that she may at least be able to exonerate herself from the fact that she didn't have to manipulate Ruby Franke, but that Ruby Franke was all in on this of her own accord, and they were doing whatever they were doing together in consensus because they shared the same line of thinking and beliefs. I don't know if she'll be able to defend herself from that, and even by extension from all charges leveled against her. I don't think Jodi Hildebrandt is going to come out of this unscathed. I think at least some of the charges are going to stick and she's going to face some punishment. But fast forward, Ruby Franke's sentencing is scheduled to be on the 20th of February next year. So obviously, Ruby Franke is not going to have the best of Christmas. Jodi Hildebrandt is also not going to have the best of Christmas this year. Actually, her trial is going to be within the Christmas season. So I guess Santa wouldn't have any gifts for Jodi Hildebrandt and even Ruby Franke. But let's pause a minute to look at the impact of this on the other parties in this whole case. Because mind you, all these charges are coming from what was done to the kids of Ruby Franke. And when it goes like this, although the arms of justice or the wheels of justice are turning to ensure that justice prevails, sometimes you have a feeling that it might leave the victims and even family members with mixed emotions. Because on one hand, you are getting the justice, but on the other hand, you are also getting feedback from the pain of whatever is happening to your relative out of the deliverance of justice. So it's either a win-win or a win-lose, at least, for some of these relatives. But for Ruby Franke, I watched the footage of her in court. I don't know, but it seemed like she was showing some form of remorse. Some are also suspecting she might have been pretending to sell the whole thing because she needed to look the part for it to be believable that she was actually being manipulated into an altered sense of reality by Jodi Hildebrandt, and it looks like the scales have now fallen off of her eyes, which I don't believe. She's 41. Personally, I think that she knew whatever she was doing because she was actually running her own 8 Passengers Mom YouTube channel with her husband, Kevin Franke, and they were doing their own thing. Although we don't see the extreme versions of what she's been charged of playing out on that YouTube channel, at least there were some subtle forms of it. So if for anything, maybe Jodi Hildebrandt might have escalated whatever Ruby Franke was doing, but I think fundamentally Ruby Franke was on the same path as Jodi Hildebrandt, and maybe Jodi Hildebrandt was the senior because Ruby was 41 or is 41, and Jodi Hildebrandt, who is actually her business partner, is 54 years old. So with an age difference of about 13 years, these are 2 adults. And in as much as Jodi Hildebrandt is older and might be able to influence Ruby Franke, I don't think Ruby Franke can pin everything on Jodi Hildebrandt and make it seem like, oh, for me, I was just the perfect mom, and then Jodi Hildebrandt just manipulated me. So I am a victim of Jodi Hildebrandt and a victim of her manipulation psychologically, emotionally, and it got me to do what I did to my kids. I don't agree to that. I believe that maybe Jodi Hildebrandt may have contributed to an extent, but even in the absence of that contribution, Ruby Franke was well on her way to doing the things that she was doing by herself. But the other question also is, what about her husband, Kevin Franke? How is he fitting in all this? And how is the law going to deal with him, if it will? Because as it stands now, the main focus seems to be on Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, but I bet you I wouldn't be surprised if after dealing with these two, they begin to look into him and the possibility of bringing him into the loop. Because prior to connections involving Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, Kevin Franke and his then wife, Ruby Franke, were running the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, and there are some allegations of some wrongs having been done to their kids, even in the process of putting together content or in the contents that they put out on this YouTube channel. So maybe Kevin Franke may not be out of the woods like that, because investigations might actually bring up something involving himself and Ruby Franke on the 8 Passengers YouTube channel. And I'm sure that wherever Kevin Franke is, he'll be trying to dot his I's and cross his T's, and might actually be looking at getting legal representation just in anticipation of the possibility that he might be brought into this conversation, because it's still possible. Some might say it's a long shot. I don't think it's a long shot. I think it's a possibility that law enforcement and the prosecution may be looking at least just to be sure they've also dotted all their I's and crossed their T's. So this case might not be over, and obviously it isn't, because the trial of Jodi Hildebrandt is set to commence on the 27th of December 2023. And what if that trial also begins to bring up details? What if Jodi Hildebrandt also decides that, okay, if you, Ruby Franke, you are throwing me under the bus, I also have some extra things on you prosecution didn't even know at the time of sentencing, and I'm going to bring out all these things, all these skeletons from the closet, so that if you are taking me down, I'm taking you down with me. That could also spiral the whole case, because I think that having worked closely with Ruby Franke, Jodi Hildebrandt's testimony and corroborating evidence on SABE against Ruby Franke might also hold some water, which could be resulting in new charges probably being leveled against Ruby Franke. Because at the time these charges were brought up, these two were together. They hadn't turned on each other. But now, technically, Ruby Franke is turning on Jodi Hildebrandt. Let's see how that will play out. But when I watched the footage of Ruby Franke admitting to her guilt in those 4 charges, my heart sank, because I asked myself, how would her kids feel when they watch that video? It's heavy. In the end, I don't think any of the parties involved in this case will come out unscathed, even for the victims and even for the other parties who are not necessarily victims but related in one way or the other to either the victims or the culprits. This is going to affect them in one way or the other. If you know of any of these people, lend your support to them. These are difficult times for them, and they need all the love they can get. Subscribe to the channel if you are yet to do so. Turn on the post notification. We're bringing you more stories from Africa and all the continents across the world. And hey, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. But as you celebrate, please stay safe out there. I'll catch you next time.